Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving headfirst into the punishing, deeply intricate, and honestly, just absolutely fascinating world of Dark Souls. Whether you're a hardened veteran of Lord Dran or you just really appreciate brilliant game design, we're going to break down exactly how this game uses its enemy encounters to mold, teach, and yeah, sometimes completely break the player. We're going to look directly at the design tropes and the deep lore that make every single combat encounter feel completely monumental.
So, I want you to keep this question in the back of your mind as we go through today's explainer. What makes a game world feel simultaneously so brutally hostile and profoundly tragic? Dark Souls is obviously famous for its relentless mechanical difficulty, but right beneath that punishing surface layer is a deeply woven narrative of sorrow and decay. Today, we're going to explore how the game marries these two concepts perfectly through its enemy design. Here's our level map for today. First, welcome to Lord Dran. Then we'll look at mindless mooks and beasts, followed by gatekeepers and beefgates. After that, the demon vanguard, and we'll wrap up with the chaos and the end. All right, let's dive right into Section 1, Welcome to Lord Dran, Decoding the Hostility. To really get a grip on how Dark Souls constructs these brutal encounters, we're going to use a specific analytical lens, and that is TV tropes. If you're not familiar, tropes are just recognizable conventions used in narrative and game design to structure our experience. By using terms like glass cannon or beefgate, we get a really structured, objective way to look at how the developers at From Software manipulate our expectations, teach us harsh lessons, and build a world that feels incredibly hostile. We aren't just going to say an enemy is hard. We're going to look at exactly how and why they are hard. Moving on to Section 2, Mindless Mooks and Beasts, the Cannon Fodder. The game wastes absolutely no time giving players a fast, brutal welcome, and the sheer diversity of the threat level here is staggering. First up, we've got the Torch Hollows. These guys are the ultimate glass cannons. They have practically zero health, but if you don't block their wild, fiery flurries, they can take out a strong player in a single, brutal combo. Then you've got the Sewer Rats. Filthy, disease-ridden, and they use the Zerg Rush strategy where hitting just one aggroes a whole swarm of 3 to 5 at once. Next are the Undead Attack Dogs. These are fragile speedsters. They have these barely telegraphed lunges that make them temporarily invulnerable, an absolute nightmare in tight spaces. And finally, the Basilisks. Underneath those silly, cartoonish fake eyes is an instant kill curse mechanic, turning them into the ultimate area denial threat. So what's the point of all this? Well, these early enemies are not just cannon fodder meant to make you feel powerful, not at all. They act as harsh, mechanical instructors. They relentlessly teach you to manage crowds, to read enemy telegraphs, to respect your environment. Above all, they teach you that in Lord Dran, complacency literally means death. Which brings us to Section 3, Gatekeepers and Beefgates, the unmovable objects. As you push further into mid-tier threats, you hit this fantastic design trope known as the Beefgate. This is an extraordinarily tough enemy placed super early in a game specifically to block a path. Their massive health pools and one-hit kill potential are basically giant neon signs from the developers screaming, "Hey, you are not ready for this area yet. Turn back." Let's look at 3 of the most famous Beefgates in the game. First, Hovel the Rock. This guy was locked away in a watchtower basement, and for very good reason. He literally wears armor carved from solid rock, giving him immense poise, and he swings this massive dragon-tooth club that will instantly flatten a low-level player. Then there's the Hellkite Dragon, technically a drake, that turns an entire bridge into a lethal, one-hit kill environmental hazard with its lingering fire breath. And finally, the Black Knights, elite, scorched armor sets left behind by Gwyn's army. Bumping into one of these guys in the Undead Burg is terrifying because their damage output vastly outmatches yours. I mean, how would you handle roadblocks this heavily armored? Well, it turns out brute force isn't always the answer in Dark Souls. Facing these juggernauts teaches you that sometimes the absolute smartest move is a strategic retreat. It pushes you to explore alternative routes or, hey, if you're feeling daring, to figure out a clever cheese tactic, like plunging attacks or luring them right off a cliff. The game is rewarding your spatial awareness and your problem-solving skills, not just your combat reflexes. All right, Section 4, the Demon Vanguard, Tests of Skill. As this all builds into the actual boss encounters, we find that terrifying visual designs are actually masking very specific mechanical tests.
Have you ever cruised through a game until you hit a brick wall that completely halts your progress? That's a wake-up call, boss. In Dark Souls, the ultimate example is the Capper Demon. This boss is a dual machete-wielding lightning bruiser, but the real test isn't just his moveset, it's the fact that he's flanked by two of those lightning-fast undead attack dogs, and you're all crammed into a ridiculously tiny claustrophobic arena. It forces you to master spatial awareness, crowd control, and target prioritization in literally a matter of seconds. And this brilliantly illustrates how the developers reuse their assets to create entirely new tests. On one side, we have the Asylum Demon, your classic warm-up boss. It introduces you to the game's mechanics, complete with a nice plunging attack advantage to start things off. But later, if you figure out how to return to that starting area, you drop through the floor and face the Stray Demon. This is what we call an underground monkey trope. It looks exactly like the Asylum Demon, but instead of a hammer, it's got a magic catalyst, fires massive explosive magic blasts, and is a total damage sponge with endgame stats. The philosophy here is so simple but so incredibly effective. By reusing and remixing these familiar encounters, the game ensures you can never just rest on your laurels. You might think you know exactly how to fight a giant demon, but when the game gives it an area of effect magic blast and triples its health, you're forced to constantly adapt. You never get to feel completely comfortable or safe. Which brings us to our final section, Section 5, the chaos and the end, the fading flame. Now, as we transition from the raw mechanical instruction of the early days to the heavy, melancholic lore found in Dark Souls 3, I want you to listen to how the game describes it. The shriveled old Demon King is now like a clump of burnt ash, but he is the last living witness of the chaos of Izalith. This is profound. The demon race, which served as these terrifying, unmovable mechanical tests throughout the early games, has been reduced to this tragic, fading figure. The fire that birthed them is dying, and the old Demon King is really just waiting for the end. But Dark Souls doesn't just let you sit with that tragedy, right? It forces you to interact with it mechanically. Once you finally defeat him, you have to make a choice. You can consume his soul for a quick 10,000 souls, just a mere currency boost. You can transpose it into Chaos Bed Vestiges, which community notes confirm is an absolute monster of a pyromancy spell, or you can transpose it into the Old King's Great Hammer, which players actively describe as a pretty crappy version of other Great Hammers in the game. I really want you to think about the weight of that. You are stripping away the life and the historical legacy of an entire doomed race, the literal last witness of Izalith, and boiling it all down to a transactional upgrade for your character's arsenal. The deep, tragic lore of the world is directly connected to a simple, mechanical menu choice you make back at your hub. And so, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought, taken straight from a player's reflection in the community notes. His soul faint, and his race doomed, all he wanted was to rest. Was it worth it, Ashen One? Was that monster pyromancy spell worth extinguishing the very last ember of a dying race? That intersection of gameplay reward and narrative guilt is exactly what makes Dark Souls an absolute masterpiece. Thanks so much for joining me on The Explainer today, and I'll catch you in the next one.